Nothing but blue skies and tailwinds from now on. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 332 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today, I'll be speaking with Pietro, the first Type 1 in the country to hold a first-class medical license given by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. Pietro can fly whatever plane he wants now. Type 1 diabetes be damned. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Dexcom and Omnipod. You can go to dexcom.com/juicebox or myomnipod.com/juicebox to find out more about the sponsors. Omnipod will even send you a free no-obligation demo right to your home. Please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise, and always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. You're going to like this.
Hi everybody, my name is Pietro Marsala and I am the first insulin-treated diabetic pilot to be certified for a FAA first class medical.
Pietro, that's the nice part. We'll get to that in a second. You and I know each other through Instagram, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, we've followed each other for quite some time, and we've spoke a few times via direct messenger, and yeah, it's been nice.
It absolutely has. And you shared a photo one time of you in a plane, like with your Dexcom graph, I think.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That was you. I used to use that in live events, by the way.
Oh, did you? Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, I'm right on top of that, by the way. Made me look interesting, because somebody who was listening to the podcast in a plane. My confusion is then you were it felt like you were flying the plane. Were you not flying the plane then?
Yeah, so one of the pictures I think I sent you way back was just a picture. We were sitting at cruise on like 10,000 feet going to San Diego, and you can kind of set your headset up depending on what kind of headset you have in aviation. Some of them have the ability for Bluetooth, mm-hmm. And when the air traffic controllers speak to us, it blocks out whatever you're listening to if you're listening to something on your Bluetooth, and immediately it turns the attention to what we're doing. And in that case, we were just sitting in cruise. There's not much going on. And I had your podcast downloaded, so I was listening to it a little bit, and there we went. And so then I sent you that picture that I was listening to it at 10,000 feet, and it's not the same as listening to it at home, so I couldn't do it long. But it was pretty cool to pop that podcast open and listen to kind of how you go about your podcast and how it's kind of changed my life in a way. As well as many other aspects of like Dexcom and different things, and how they've kind of influenced me to be bold and like you talk about. And so, yeah, I sent you that picture. I thought it was pretty cool.
I really appreciate it. I thought it was amazing, honestly. And so I was right. You had control of the plane. So you had a pilot's license then, but that's different now, right? So let's kind of go backwards a little bit. Mm-hmm. Let me find out, how old were you when you were diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed, I was diagnosed back in January 2012 with type 2 diabetes.
How long did it take them to figure out you had type 1?
So it's kind of weird. So I went to, I had all the classic symptoms, right, that we always talk about. I'm not going to bore you with those, but most people that listen to this podcast know what those are. So I was diagnosed in 2012 in January, and it took me about 10 or 11 months until they correctly diagnosed me with type 1, because I went to go see an endocrinologist after, the oral medication wasn't stabilizing me. Mm-hmm. And so we went to go see this endocrinologist, and he looked at me and he said, "You don't fit the bill of a type 2 patient. Have they run this test on you?" I forgot what test it was, if it was a C-peptide or what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah. And so they ran that test, and then they confirmed it was type 1 diabetes at that point in November. I believe it was November 2012. And in January 2012, I was diagnosed with type 2. November 2012, I was diagnosed with type 1.
Okay. So basically, around 2013, you knew you had type 1 diabetes. And I've taken a pen and a pencil just now, and I've written down 2020. Then under it, I wrote 2013. And then I did some subtraction, and I figured out that was about 7 years ago. Does that seem right?
Yeah, that's about right.
Right.
Yeah.
How old were you then?
I was 21 years old. I was 21, so I was diagnosed at 21.
Okay. So were you a pilot then?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So I was in the middle of my flight training when I was diagnosed. I was in January 2012. I was working on my commercial certificate because my goal had always been to be an airline pilot. And in January 2012, was diagnosed with it. And so I went to go see a doctor, like I said, and he diagnosed me with type 2 diabetes. And kind of long story short, it was obviously a really hard day for me. But I was just excited as a 21-year-old to know that, hey, it's not the worst thing in life. If I've got to manage my blood sugar and I can stay fit and I could just exercise and diet and keep me in a safe range, then I could return to the flight deck. And, I looked on the FAA's website at the time, and it said that if you're a type 2 diabetic and you don't require insulin, that you could still carry what's called a first-class medical certificate. And for those of you out there that don't know what a first-class medical certificate is it allows you to fly for an airline here in the United States. So as pilots, we carry both pilot certificates and medical certificates. And I was working on my pilot certificate to be qualified for the airline. Well, in the middle of that, I got diagnosed with the diabetes, and that kind of threw a wrench in it and didn't allow me to carry a first class anymore. With type 2 diabetes, I worked hard. I got my first class medical back about 6 months after that because the FAA requires you to stabilize on the medication. And so I worked hard at it. I dieted, I exercised, I got off the insulin, I maintained my blood sugar on metformin. At the time, I was taking the oral medication, and the FAA was fine with that. So they gave me my first class medical back. Well, only to take it away again after about 3 or 4 months after that point, when I got diagnosed officially with type 1 diabetes. And obviously, as many of you know, that it requires insulin on type 1. And so that was probably harder than the original diagnosis of type 2, because at that point I'd done my homework and my research on what it takes to carry a first class medical, and I knew that insulin at the time was a disqualifying drug, and so that was just probably the hardest day of my life to this day.
I imagine. Yeah. Hey, can I ask you a question? In the time between the type 2 and type 1 diagnosis, where you're working so hard to get stable, I guess for the lack of a better term, do you think you were so focused on that stability? Is that why it took longer for you to find out you had type 1? Like, what I'm interested in, what takes the time to figure out I really don't have type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, so it was just weird because, I got on the insulin, and my A1C was in the 10s at the time when I first got diagnosed, obviously not knowing that I had it. And they told me I needed to be, I think it was like below 9% to carry a third class medical to fly, like for fun and, to be a flight instructor and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And so I started working at that. I started working out like crazy. I was watching what I ate. I ate basically like not zero carb. That's impossible, but very, very low carb, right. Very, very low carb at the time. Because I was on metformin. I wanted to get off the insulin, and I was figuring out pretty quickly that the less insulin you take, the less risk you have for hypoglycemia. Mm-hmm. And so I started with this whole low carb thing. I was, dieting. I was exercising a lot, and so as I was doing that, life was, I'm not going to say easy, but it got easier. I started, pricking my finger, 10 times a day, 8 times a day, whatever I was doing. And it took me about, a good 6 months. It was a good estimate for the FAA to say, hey, you need to stabilize for 6 months until I figured out, kind of how the metformin works and, when, how the low feels, how the high feels, and kind of get the symptoms of what it feels like to be in each range. I didn't have a CGM at the time when I was a type 2 patient, or when I thought I was a type 2 patient.
Right.
And so I was just managing with finger sticks, and it took me a good 6 months to stabilize. I was doing everything that I possibly could to maintain that blood sugar, and I felt confident in the ability to maintain it on metformin. Well, every morning I'd wake up, and as many type 2 patients do, I think before breakfast, the first thing they do is they test their blood sugar, they finger prick, right? And so I was seeing a rise in blood sugar. I would see 95, and that would be great. Okay, cool. I'm below 100. Sweet. And then I would see 110 and 120 and 130 as the days went on. And I'm like, what in the heck is going on? And I knew nothing about what a honeymoon phase meant. I was so uneducated about the whole thing when I was 21.
Right.
And so, so then that's when my mom was like, I think we should go for a second opinion and see an endocrinologist and see what he tells you. And of course, at first I didn't want to do it because I was scared of, what was to come if it was possibly type 1. And he comes, he looks at me, and like I said, he told me I didn't fit the bill and ran a test and confirmed it was type 1.
It's interesting. You didn't fit the bill. Did he mean visually at first or through tests?
Yes.
Yeah. It's weird because I know what you look like and you're a fit young guy and all, but You could have type 2 diabetes. It's not, it wouldn't be out of the question.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and he, he looked at me, he goes, "You don't fit the bill." And I was like confused by that. I mean, I don't know what you mean. I mean, yeah, I played soccer my whole life and I consider myself a fairly fit person. And so, I was confused. I was like, how is this possible? I didn't know that, type 2 or the difference between type 1 and type 2. And I just thought that people in general that had diabetes were unfortunately people that didn't take the best care of themselves. Well, obviously I didn't know better.
Yeah.
So he diagnosed me with type 1 and I had to go on insulin immediately. And I kept, before he ran the test, I kept telling him like it was going to change his mind or something. And he had some magic potion that, when I took the lab test that it would change his mind. I kept telling him, my endocrinologist, and I'm still with the same endocrinologist today. He's a great guy. But I kept telling him, "Hey, I'm a pilot. I can't be on insulin. They don't let me fly with insulin." And he's like, "Well, let's get you healthy first before you worry about, what's next. Let's take it one step at a time."
Yeah.
And so, he diagnosed me and just crushed my dreams. Everything I had dreamed of since I was a kid, of becoming a pilot. And well, I was a pilot already, but I was a private pilot, and, becoming a commercial pilot and living this dream was just, everything was so hard for me to,
a trash heap. Yeah. Oh, geez. Listen, I want to understand if you were, at that time, if this type 2 thing didn't happen in 2012 and then type 1 in 2013, at what point do you think you would have been able to achieve becoming a commercial pilot? Like what year do you think that would have started for you as a way to make money and a career?
Yeah. Good question. So, so with type, like I said, so you're saying if I would have got diagnosed with type 1 when I got diagnosed, and I never got type 2, right?
No, I'm wondering if it never happened at all. Like at what pace were you on?
Okay. So I would have so I started in January 2012 my commercial certificate training, and I would have been done with that probably by March. Wow. At the latest. I finished it in 2 months when I went back to school, but it probably would have taken me initially 2 to 3 months to finish that off. But the thing is that just because you become a commercial pilot and you're certified, that doesn't mean that anybody's going to hire you, because the regulations, the way they're written, is that you have to build flight time.
Okay.
And so you have to have 1,500 hours of flight time experience. So it would have taken me a few years to build that time.
I see.
And so I would have been diagnosed sooner rather than later. Eventually, I would have got to the point where I needed insulin, and I would have had to stop it eventually.
But in a world where diabetes didn't exist, you probably would have taken 3 years or so to build up your flight time, and then you kind of put yourself out there and start looking for jobs. And so there's a whole process in there. But what I'm getting at is, because that didn't happen, how did you shift your ideas about how you were going to, feed yourself? Like what happened to your goals?
Yeah. And so the way for most, I'm going to say the majority of pilots that go through school, a lot of times there's multiple ways you can build time to get to that 1,500 hours. For me, it was, I chose the flight instructor route, and I was able to be a flight instructor on insulin because it only required a third class medical. There's 3 different certifications of medicals. There's first, second, and third. Okay. Third being the lowest and first being the highest. First for commercial pilots to exercise their privileges in an airline, and third to do small stuff like fly for fun and become a flight instructor. So in my eyes, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take the flight instructor route because it beats sitting in a cubicle. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, I'm going to become a flight instructor. I'm going to build my time, because that's originally what I had planned to do anyway, to get to my airline job. Right. And so what I did was I built time as a flight instructor, and I kind of just stuck it in the industry. I built experience and moved up in the company, and I'm pretty fortunate. They take good care of me, and it's been a great company to work for. And so I'm really fortunate because they played a crucial part in this whole thing too. And as I get telling the story, it'll all make sense. But they played this part where I was able to show proof that I'm stable in flight. Because again, most people on insulin that have a medical certificate from the FAA, they don't fly for a living like I do. A lot of them, flight instructors, they typically don't make a huge amount of money. And so most people don't choose this life and this career. If you get diagnosed in the middle of your training, a lot of people just say, okay, I'll fly for fun, and I'll kind of drop it on the professional side. But I continued because this is all I ever knew. Since I was a kid, I was flying flight simulators. And so I decided, I'm just going to stick in aviation. This is what I love to do. And at least I'm in an airplane. It's not commercial aviation like I want to do, but at least I'm flight instructing and teaching other people how to fly and live their dreams.
Yeah. Hey, listen, in the time before things have shifted recently, and now you're able to have that first class medical license. But prior to that, when you were doing the flight instruction, when you get into a plane with somebody who's looking for instruction, do you have to tell them you have type 1 prior? Did you have to look at them and go, hey, listen, I use insulin, here are the things that are around it, or was that private?
No. I mean, we had to test our blood sugar in flight and too, and so most people ask like, "What is that?" I was using a continuous glucose monitor as well, a G6, and so it didn't require finger stick testing. But I test as well, and they would see that, and obviously they would ask a few questions. I would just tell them, "Yeah, I'm type 1 diabetic. This is kind of what I have to do to maintain myself in flight." And most people were kind of embarrassed to ask any further questions. I just kind of explained to them that this is kind of what I have to do, and they didn't really really dig too deep.
What you should have said to them is, please
that.
keep looking forward. We're up in the air in a tin can and pay attention to what we're doing, because you understand, you've heard me with other pilots on here. I don't understand the concept of wanting to leave the ground and being in control of the thing. I get on a commercial airliner under protest. I'm a good flyer. I don't, I'm not on the plane constantly thinking, well, this is the end of my life. But the other day I thought about getting a drone, and I thought if I got a drone, I'd fly it up in the air and it would come right back down and crash into the ground. I have no spatial awareness. Like when things start changing, like the idea of a gimbal just fries my mind, So I don't understand at all. If somebody started talking to me while I was teaching them how to fly, I'd be like, please look straight ahead. Please stop talking. I'll be fine.
No, it's funny because we train, the company I work for, we train airline cadets, so future airline pilots from all over the world. And a lot of these guys and gals in the beginning, you have to tell them, because when we talk, our mics are linked up. And so we don't have to look at each other to speak. Obviously, we can hear each other on our headsets.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them, out of respect, because they're from different parts of the world, and especially in the Asian culture, it's a thing where they like to look at you in the face, which is respectful, obviously, but not when you're flying an airplane. And a lot of times we have to tell these guys, hey, we can talk by looking straight ahead. When I ask you a question, don't look at me, keep flying.
Oh, we all know someone we drive with who says something and turns to you, you're like, yo, brother, listen, please. Just look over there. Well, you can hear me still. No, I hear that. So you're, obviously we're kind of talking around a little bit, but you work for one of the major companies, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and so I work for a company out of Phoenix. It's a local flight school here, and for those that don't know the flight training world in Phoenix, Arizona, we do among the most flight training in the country. Us in California, Arizona has a lot of flight training here, just because the weather is so formidable to fly.
Yeah,
I would say we have our flying days are probably over 300 days a year that we can fly. So the weather is great here to do flight training. So people come from all over the world to do flight training here, and I work for one of the bigger companies here in Phoenix. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So so there's a rule in place forever. If you use insulin, if you're diabetic that uses insulin, you can't have this certification. There's other kinds of planes you can fly. You can fly for your personal fun, but you can't take a people mover up in the air basically and move them around.
Yeah, and so it wasn't. What's interesting, Scott, is the FAA. The way the rules are written is it doesn't matter how many people you have behind you, as long as they're not paying you. Was the way the rule was written. It's interesting because I have a commercial certificate, I have a private pilot certificate, and I have these certificates that if I was rich enough to own a jet and fly across the country, I can do so, even on insulin, as long as the people behind me aren't paying me. And that's kind of the way the rule is written. And I brought that up to the FAA before, and that's obviously a head scratcher for them. And the guys that I spoke to weren't the ones that created that regulation. Mm-hmm. But that's what was interesting to me. It was just funny that I could fly with people behind me that are not paying me, but the minute somebody's paying me for that flight, now it's held to a different safety standard.
Okay, so I want to go over a couple of ideas about airplanes for a second, because I don't know if you realize this or not, but today I just saw this on social media, and I don't know what they're calling it, so I can't find it very quickly. Maybe you'll know. There's some fighter jets that are flying some path through the Northeast today in support of medical professionals and everything that's going on with Corona. They're going to go by my house in about the next 25 minutes, which is weird that you and I are on while that's happening. Now, so these are fighter jets. I have been on, I get on a plane in Newark and I want to fly, let's say, to Wisconsin. I sit down, I'm on a jet that has 3 seats on the left and 3 seats on the right, 30 or so rows. I don't know what kind of plane that is. Seems like a big plane to me. Sometimes I fly out of Houston to come home, and all of a sudden I'm in a plane that genuinely feels like a mall with wings. Right? You know what I'm saying? There's two seats on the right. There's 4 in the middle. There's 2 on the left. You can't see the front of the plane from the back of the plane. Can you fly all of those planes?
Are you saying now that the rules have changed?
I'm saying you personally, like, can you bro down and get in those planes and make them go? I'm going to do 2 ads in 2 minutes. Hang out, see if I can do it. The Omnipod Tubeless insulin pump is the pump my daughter has been wearing since she was 4 years old. She'll turn 16 this summer. She's been wearing an Omnipod every day for that time, and it is spectacular. No tubing means no controller to carry around with you, clipped in your bra, under your belt, wherever you have to stuff that. Other tube pumps, you know what I mean? There's an infusion set, a long tube, and then something to carry with you. Not the Omnipod. Omnipod is a small, self-contained device. You put it on, that's it. You control the insulin from a separate device that does not need to be attached to you. It is spectacular. This may be hard for you to believe. So what you should do is go to myomnipod.com/juicebox and get a free, no obligation demo of the Omnipod sent directly to you today. Do it right now. It's free. That means it doesn't cost you money, and there's no obligation, which means you don't have to keep it, right? You'll get the demo and you can throw it in the trash and be done with it. Say, I don't care about this, or you can keep going. It's up to you. Don't let me or anyone else make a decision that you could make on your own. The Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor is at the heart of how we make insulin decisions for my daughter. The trend arrows tell me the speed and direction that my daughter's blood sugar is moving, and with that information, we make decisions about food and insulin that keep my daughter in a tight range, and she stays there most of the time. There's no big secret. We just use the right amount of insulin at the right time, and you could too if you had a Dexcom G6. Head to dexcom.com/juicebox to get started today. You will not be sorry that you made that trip on your keyboard. That's all you gotta do.
So our commercial certificate doesn't limit us to any specific type of airplane. So to answer your question specifically, as pilots, we need what are called type ratings, and any plane that weighs over 12,000 pounds, you need to have what's called a type rating. And so what it is you have a general certificate that allows you to be paid to fly. And then once you go work for the specific airline that you choose to work for, they assign you an aircraft, and you go to school for 2 months. And in addition to all the schooling you've been through over the years, you go to specific school for that airplane for 2 months, and they teach you exactly on how the ins and outs of that specific airplane. And they type you. They give you a type certificate. So they basically, you're a specialist in that airplane. You're certified to fly that airplane as part of your ratings. And so these simulators that they put us in at the airlines, they're multi-million dollar simulators. In fact, most people don't know this, but the first time that if you're an airline pilot and it's your first job flying for an airline, the first time you have passengers behind you is the first time you're flying that plane. You don't go up and just fly a plane around for fun and have the company train you. The old days it was like that, but now with simulators being so accurate, they don't require that anymore. You can actually the first time you fly that plane is the first time you actually have people behind you. All your training is done in a simulator because it's so realistic.
Wow, that's
so yeah, to answer your question, yes.
That's so cool. Hey, so if a person was in that simulation process, let's call him Bill, and Bill wants to be a pilot, and Bill keeps crashing the simulator. How many times does Bill get away with crashing the simulator before they tell him he'd probably make a better, host on the plane instead of the pilot?
Yeah.
Like, how does that? Like, how many strikes until you're out?
How many strikes until you're out? Good question. Well, they don't give you. I mean, it's not like one time the plane crashes, you're done. That's not how that works, really.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously it's an overall picture of what you guys are doing, and there's various phases of flight that they put you in. They will run you through the simulator. I've never done this actually because I'm not an airline pilot yet, and I just got my certification. But from what I've heard from everybody that has gone that I've known and people that have been there a while, they put you through various phases of flight. They put you through the hardest of the hard. And so it's very challenging. There's a chance that people can wash out too, and they don't hold your hand through it. They hold you to it.
Yeah.
And so they only take the best of the best, and as they should, obviously. And so how many strikes until you're out, I'm not sure.
Gotcha.
But I know that they do a lot of. They're pretty selective on who they allow to fly the general public around. Like I said, like they should.
What's the stress like? Flying or even in a simulator, does it affect your blood sugar? Do you need more insulin when you're flying?
In a simulator, you're on the ground. I mean, it's just like an airplane, right? I treat it just like an airplane. Not so much. I mean, when I'm flying, my blood sugars are probably the most stable. A, because I'm fasting, and B, because it's part of my scan. I use a CGM. I use a G6 Dexcom, and so obviously, as you know, and as most of you know that listen to this, that use a G6, it makes your life so much easier. And so while I'm scanning the instruments and I'm flying myself, or I'm instructing, or whatever I'm doing, I use the Dexcom G6 as part of my scan. And, it's just a quick glance at my CGM to see where my levels are at. And I just keep myself really stable in flight.
Oh, wow. So your glucose monitor becomes part of your checking of gauges.
That's correct. Yeah. So the scan that we have, we check every instrument. What we call a racetrack pattern is where we go around and we check each individual instrument to make sure that it's working correctly and that we're seeing what we should be seeing. And, a quick glance at my Dexcom I'm kind of OCD about it, but I check it every 5 to 10 minutes just to make sure it's still there, even though I'm stable and my basal's set right.
And what part of that
I use it as part of my scan.
At what part of the scan do you look for the text from potential dates? Is that
no? It's funny, right? Because you don't really get service in a lot of areas where we're at, and so cell service isn't part of, or dating isn't part of the scan.
All right, I'm going to ask you one unrelated question that I'm dying to know the answer to, and then I'm going to move on to things that are actually pertinent to what we're talking about.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, why does my cell phone or yours or anyone else's work at certain elevations and not others?
What does your cell phone work at certain elevation, not others? Yeah,
we're moving to satellite conversations now, which has nothing to do with flight. Okay. So I understand that the signal's being beamed to the surface, right? And they're being pointed at land masses too, which is why you don't get cell service out to sea, for instance. But how when you take off, everyone's been. Listen, I think everyone's had something going on Netflix when the plane goes up, and you're pretty amazed that 25 minutes into the flight, you're still watching, right? So, then all of a sudden it cuts off. Why does that happen?
Well, those people should be downloading before they get airborne so 100%. That they don't have that issue of it cutting out.
100%.
But anyway, it's it's interesting. Somebody reached out on social media to me the other day and said, why can't we use our cell phones in flight? And truthfully, I don't have the best answer for you, because before it was a myth that and it could have been with the technology that they used before, with the radio signals that we used to use in order to track what we call airways. They're basically highways in the sky. We needed these specific navigation sources to operate correctly, and the cell phones could have distorted that signal. And so that's why the crew recommended for you not to be, or not recommended, required you to not be on your cell phone. To this day, why they still do it, I'm not sure, because a lot of the stuff that we do is GPS based and has nothing to do with those cell signals.
I think it's just the man trying to hold me down, Pietro, but that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. So do you know the genesis of, I've had a couple people come on and talk about it, but I think it's interesting because of where we are now. John came on years ago to talk about wanting to get these first class medical license back for people with, type 1 diabetes. Even back then he was saying, man, because there's glucose monitors now. It's a different world. You're not just hoping your blood sugar doesn't fall. There's different ways to manage. But what's the genesis of how this happened? Like, why is it okay now with the FAA? How were you able to get this license? Like, what's the behind the scenes about how we got to it?
Yeah, definitely. So CGM has become a huge part of this game. And to give you kind of a quick backstory, I was able to go to the FAA. I was fortunate enough. I was just touring DC with a girlfriend at the time, and I was walking around DC in shorts and a t-shirt, and I'm like, hey,
I got to stop you for a second. Did you say you can't get text so that you can ignore your girlfriend while you're flying? Is that what's going on here? Is this an elaborate
right
ruse? All right, I understand. Phones don't work in planes. Sorry. All right, you were in DC. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm in DC, and I'm touring around with an ex-girlfriend at the time. And, we come across, we're looking at the museums and whatnot, the monuments, and we come across the FAA's building. It's the Department of Transportation. I'm not sure if you've been there or not, but not that you would have any reason to be. But
how do you know? I'm just kidding. I've never been there. Go ahead.
we came across the building, and I'm in shorts and a t-shirt, just kind of in the summer, just touring around. And I've been outside all day. And she goes, hey, why don't you go inside and speak to the FAA? And this is back in 2016, in the summer of 2016. And she goes, why don't you go inside and speak to the FAA? I was like, are you kidding? Look how I'm dressed. I'm not presentable. I don't even know what I want to say yet. I have an idea, but she goes, well, just go in there and give it a shot. And I'm just like, all right, fine. So I walk in, and there's a security, like, it looks like a TSA kind of checkpoint. And there's this huge building. I walk in, there's all these people looking at me like, what is this dude doing here? You don't look like you're supposed to be here. And so I asked the security guard, I said, hi, is Dr. Duvall here? He's the deputy air surgeon for the FAA. And he's like, who? And I'm like, he's the deputy air surgeon. I thought by me giving him that title, he would know immediately who I'm talking about. He goes, this is a big building, man. He's like, there's a lot of people here. He goes, but anyway, if you want to go upstairs, you need an appointment. I'm like, okay, see ya. So I just walked out, and I walked out of there, and my girlfriend at the time was like, what did he say? And I said, well, we need an appointment to go upstairs, and so he's not going to allow us in. She goes, okay, all right. So I was like, you know what? I have his email, so I'm going to shoot him an email and see if he responds. I doubt it, but I'll give him a shot. I'll give it a shot anyway. Mm-hmm. So I did. I shot him an email, and I'm at dinner that night in DC, and my phone goes off, and it's him. It's Dr. Duvall. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. That was the first time I've ever reached out to him, and I told him basically, hey, I'm here from Phoenix. And, I'd love to chat with you and share my story. If you have the time, it would be awesome to meet you. And he responded with, great, I would love to meet you. How about tomorrow at 12? And I'm like, holy cow, done. And so I put some things together and tried to look presentable. And I went up there and we had a meeting. And first we sat down. He was like, hey, I don't have a lot of time for you. And so I sat down. Next thing you know, we're there for an hour and a half. And so he loved my story. I was kind of in a unique position as a flight instructor to kind of share my data with him every day and show him that, hey, I use a continuous glucose monitor. And they knew and I think the FAA didn't know nearly as much as they did today about CGMs, because it was more the old school finger stick is what they knew of. Yeah. And so he said, we're close, but we're not quite there, is what he told me, as far as getting a first class medical to fly for an airline. And he goes, this is interesting. You have a very interesting story, and I appreciate you coming up here and speaking with me. He goes, let's keep in touch. And I had his direct line. And so over the years, I would call him every month and a half, 2 months, or, being pleasantly aggressive, as I like to say. And so I'd check in with him and every now and then. And, he would kind of update me of what's going on and the latest. And I would kind of fill him in with the latest that I've gotten. I would just start sending him things randomly. And when I say things, I mean, like, I would send him CGM data. Not that it was required, but I just wanted to show him and prove to him that this is possible. If you maintain your blood sugar, if you can be stable in flight as a flight instructor, what is the difference between being stable in flight as a flight instructor and flying for an airline 3-4 times a day? If I can manage it in flight and I'm not having highs and I'm not having lows, why isn't this, a possibility? And so he understood and he agreed with me. And he said, again, we're closer than we've ever been. And this technology is definitely a game changer. And so it does help us get a good picture, because as you know, Scott, you prick your finger. If you're only using finger sticks, you're only getting that picture, like you've talked about millions of times on your podcast. You're only getting the picture of where you're at. It doesn't even tell you where you're going, but it tells you where you're at that specific time of day. And you have no idea what's going on for the rest of the day. And that's where a CGM comes in and fills in those gaps and allows you to have a full picture of exactly what's going on. And of course, the FAA loved that idea. And so I kind of just left it at that. We kept in touch. And then I went a step further. And I got back to Phoenix and I started flight instructing. And then I myself, along with the American Diabetes Association that I was in contact with, that I am still in contact with, I decided I'm going to make a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. And with this spreadsheet, I included in there, it was basically a spreadsheet showing where my blood sugar was prior to takeoff, where it was an hour into flight, where it was 2 hours into flight, and what it was prior to landing. And then in the notes section of this Excel spreadsheet, I was able, obviously using the CGM data, I was able to see, I would go back and check exactly what times, these were and what my blood sugar was at those times. And in the notes section, I would put in if I gave myself any insulin to maintain my glucose levels, and also if I gave myself any snacks to maintain my blood sugar in flight. And so they had a very, very, very detailed picture of what was going on in my day, because as you know, a CGM just tells you what's going on 24/7. It doesn't tell you exactly what's going on for me in flight at those specific times. So I showed them, I went a step further and backed it up, not only with the CGM data, but with a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet to show, here's me in flight. And I would do 3-4 flights a day, and I'd log that 3-4 flights a day, an hour in a flight, 2 hours in a flight, before landing, prior to takeoff, all of that stuff. And so he would see exactly that I am safe and I am maintaining my blood glucose levels in flight.
No, just that it's possible was probably a big deal for him, because they set a rule like that, God knows how long ago, and then that just gets in people, and it gets in people's heads. Like, oh, people would people who use insulin can't fly a commercial plane. Boom, that's it. It's a rule, so it must be, there must be a really great reason why this exists. And then somebody like you comes along and says, well, you know what, things have changed, and let me show you how this could work. Hey, I have a real quick question. Do you still talk to Dr. Duvall?
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, when I conclude the story, I'll kind of tell you how it kind of all came together. But up to this day, we still keep in touch. And he and I don't want to say become friends, but we've definitely, he answers every one of my calls. If he doesn't answer, he'll call me right back. I have his direct line to his desk. And mind you, this is the deputy air surgeon for the FAA. This guy's top dog.
Yeah.
And so we've established a good working relationship over these last couple of years. And I've told him, you could be my guinea pig. I'll fly you out to Arizona on my own dime to show you that I can maintain my blood, my sugar levels in flight. And he was like, oh, no need to do that. And he goes, you're done enough. You've done so much by sending us the data, and we appreciate your generosity. And I've gone, and again, this was all at my own risk. There were pilots out there in the past that didn't want to share this data with the FAA, even if they had it, because they were afraid of the FAA denying them. And to me, it was like, well, I have nothing to hide. Yeah. I'm not perfect, but I know I'm controlled. And to give you an idea, and obviously an A1C doesn't tell the full picture, but my A1Cs are 6.2. I hang around that range consistently, and my Dexcom backs everything else up to show that I'm at a low risk for hypoglycemia. And I consider myself I do a pretty good job. Like I said, I'm not perfect, but I do a fairly good job at managing my diabetes, and they see that, and they appreciate that. And so again, I sent in all this data to back up what I was saying, because anybody could say they're controlled, anybody could say they're stable, but it's another thing to prove it with the CGM, and on top of that, a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. So yeah, we've kept in touch over the years, and they kind of used me in my data. And it's interesting. I found out later, a couple weeks ago, somebody from the American Diabetes Association called me and said they spoke to Dr. Duvall, and I kind of unofficially knew this, but I then found out that he said that it was your data that convinced the federal air surgeon and the deputy air surgeon that this is something that is obtainable.
That's amazing.
That this is safe and it can be done safely. And granted, not every applicant that applies for this that has diabetes on insulin is going to qualify. They're very selective. It's a very very detailed process.
I was going to say, are they asking other people for CGM data? Does everyone get asked for it now?
So before all this happened, they changed the rule back in November 2019. November 7, 2019, the FAA changed their stance on first class medicals with insulin treated diabetes, and that, regardless if that's type 2 or type 1, if you needed insulin, they treated it the same. And so now they require a CGM. Before, CGM was never required to obtain a third class medical, but now, since the rules have changed, they now make it to where you need a CGM, and there's certain CGMs that qualify. And so so now the rules have changed, and since they've changed these rules, now they're looking at each individual case, and there's only been a few of us certified now, but they use that CGM data to basically paint the picture if somebody is safe or not, and they assess your level of risk. And they're doctors up there at Aerospace Medicine, but they're not diabetes specialists, so to speak. And so they brought in a team of experts like endocrinologists, some of the leading endocrinologists in the country, some consultants, and some people to help them make these decisions to assess people's level of risk. So it is a hard process to go through, and only the safest are going to qualify, and as they should if they're flying the general public around. And so they're picky on who they're selecting, and is there people have asked me in these last couple of days, like, what did you do? What exactly do I need to do? And each individual case is different. They send you to a cardiologist, they send you to an endocrinologist, they send you, or you have to go yourself and then send us paperwork, obviously. But yeah, it's a pretty detailed test that you have to go through.
That's an astonishing story. And do you know what I took of it most is that you have a longer relationship with Dr. Duvall than you did with that girlfriend who was with you in Washington. That's really what I took from this, in case you're wondering.
That is true. We've kept in touch. He's a good guy. He really is.
Well, he doesn't nag you, right? So
yeah, exactly. He's still in the picture. And he will always be.
You call every 6 weeks. He's not like, why don't you call more? I have a question about your blood sugar targets. Are they the same when you are flying as when you're not flying, or do you have different ideas for range in different situations?
Okay, so good question.
When you tell me it's a good question, it makes me feel better. I don't know what that says about my psyche, but thank you.
So it is because I keep myself, if I'm in the 80s and I'm hovering in the 80s or the low 90s when I'm at home, I'm good with that. Because I know that if my basal's set right, and as you've talked about with Jenny and multiple people on this podcast, that if your basal's set right, you can hover in those areas and you don't need to treat it. You can go a couple hours without even eating anything and hang in the 80s and 90s, and you'll float right there if your basal's set right. And then, mind you, I'm on MDI still. I'm not on a pump, but I am on a G6. And so I kind of just hang out and if I'm at home, do I treat it a little bit differently? Sure. I'll hang out in the 80s. I'm fine with that. If I'm at 82, 83, I can be comfortable with that as long as it's staying in that range.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm flying, 80 is that much closer to 60, 60 is that much closer to 50, 50 is that much closer to 40. And so I don't take these risks. I don't do that. And so what I do is I keep myself slightly more elevated in flight. I like to keep myself in the low 100s as my target between 100 and 140, 130 is a good range for me to be in. And that's kind of the target range I have while I fly, because I know I'm nowhere near hypoglycemia. And granted, if I was in the 80s in flight, I know that I'm not going to pass out either. You and I both know that, at an 85, 90 of a blood sugar on your CGM, you're doing just fine. But again, it's just that much closer to the range of hypoglycemia. And so I, out of respect for, everybody else and whatnot, I keep myself slightly more elevated.
Do you only fly planes where there's a co-pilot? What's the standard for that?
It's interesting, Scott. Right now I'm a flight instructor and I fly with people that don't know how to fly.
Yeah.
And so I will be flying eventually once, COVID passes and the airlines pick up hiring again. It's kind of an ironic time, but eventually, my goal is to get to an airline, and I will be flying with somebody who knows how to fly, thankfully. And it's just going to be a different world. And so it's going to be, in my opinion, and many people's opinion, it's going to be much easier once I go to an airline, because now I don't have to worry about so much of the other guy not knowing how to fly. Now I've got my blood sugar and I've got my own job, instead of my blood sugar, my own job, and now his job or her job. I
was just thinking, you spent 8 years getting to a place, and you got there, and now no airplanes are flying anywhere. and it's probably, is it a little bit of a bummer that, I mean, not to specifically target coronavirus in your life, but I mean, did it feel like that a little bit? Like, wow, I got here and then all of a sudden this happened?
It is such an ironic time. It's been a wild ride, but you know what, when you're working at something for 8 years and you just cleared the biggest obstacle of your life, and you recognize that, you just did this, it's only a matter of time. I'm 29 years old and I've got 35 plus years of a career ahead of me.
Right.
And so I know that eventually this will pass. I'm optimistic that this will go away one day. And whether that takes a year, 2 years, 3 years for the airlines to return to where we were, we will get there. And I'm confident that the general public will be flying around again. And there will be a need, because there was a shortage for pilots only about a month ago. And now it went from this huge need for pilots to nobody needs pilots right now, obviously, with what's going on, nobody traveling.
Well, you have unique perspective and patience, obviously, around this, because you could have given up on it at any time and just thought it's not going to happen. It's pretty amazing. Listen, I'm interested. Like you said, when you got on, you're the first person to get this distinction. Is that true? Or you're like, how do you know?
Yeah.
It's like, so does yours have a number 1 on it or something? Or
well, it has first class, but that doesn't mean I'm the first. I'll tell you how I know I'm the first, and this was a special conversation I had with Dr. Duvall. I was driving with my current girlfriend, and my smartwatch goes off.
Does she know you like Dr. Duvall better than her, or has she not figured that out yet?
Oh yeah, she knows. She knows I've known him for 4 years now. She's okay with it. She shares the love.
Yeah, just real quick, Pietro. We're on a boat. It's sinking. It only holds 2 people. You, Dr. Duvall, and your current girlfriend are on it. What happens? And we need you to fly the plane home. So I'm just saying. Oh God, I'm not answering this, because eventually she's going to listen to this. Oh boy. So I'm driving, and Dr. Duvall told me weeks ago we were close, and obviously this protocol came out in November, and I've kind of been pleasantly aggressive, just checking in with him here and there. And just kind of asking him what's going on, what's the latest, when are we getting, certifications? And I was thinking by Christmas, because it came out in November, I was like, oh, this will be an awesome Christmas present. I'll go to an airline come January 1st, and that'll be awesome. I'll be able to live my dream, and this is going to be great. Yeah. Well, it took a little bit longer, obviously. And as things do in government, as we know, they take a little bit of time. And so I was patient, and I kind of just checked in with him, and he kind of hinted to me here and there that, we have looked at your paperwork, we have looked at your data, and it's checking out in favor. Everything is looking good. And about about a month ago now, I called him up and I said, Dr. Ball, what's going on? What's the latest? Do you have any updates for me? And he said, I can confirm that you are in Dr. Berry's inbox, ready to send out and whatnot. And it's getting close. And so I was like, okay, great. But again, it's government talk, right? These things take a little bit of time. And so I didn't want to get my hopes too high, but then eventually he said, he sent me that email, and he told me it was going to come in an email format, and it did. And so my smartwatch went off, and I was like, holy cow. And I was freaking out. My girlfriend's like, hey, pull over, because you're too excited to drive right now. Like, just pull over. And so I did. I pulled over to a safe spot before I opened the email,
and I wasn't even sure what it said yet, but it was like this secret, not a secret email, but it was a security email. And so I put in the password, I opened it up, and I scrolled to the bottom. I saw my name on it.
Secret email, if we could, because I think it makes it more exciting. You got a secret email from the government that said that you're a pilot now. But no. Yeah. So it's one of those, you have to put in a code to get to it and all that.
Yeah, exactly. You put in a password, and then I scrolled to the bottom of this email, and I just saw my name was on it. It said first class medical, and obviously I was just crying emotionally. It was just it was a really important time in my life, probably the biggest day of my life to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Just something that you worked so hard at, finally come to reality, and just knowing that your boyhood dream of doing what you wanted to do your whole life, and people telling you that you know maybe this career choice wasn't for you, maybe this isn't for you. When I was first diagnosed, maybe God has a different place for you in life, and that was a really hard pill to swallow. And so, like I said, I decided to do something about it. I went to the FAA, and I'm glad that they took me seriously. And so I called the doctor. Not even a minute later, I'm on the phone with the doctor in DC, and I call him up, and I said, obviously I was still emotional. I wasn't even done crying yet. And
that was my question, by the way. I was going to jump in right there and say, did you pull yourself together before you called?
No.
Okay.
No. And looking back, I probably should have.
I'm thinking probably, yeah. But go ahead.
So I call him up, and I was like, hey, and he obviously knew because he just sent the email. It was coming from him. And I said, Dr. Ball, I just want you to know that you've forever changed my life. And, this is the biggest day of my life. And I can't thank you enough. I'm forever grateful for everything that you did. And thank you for believing in me all along and trusting me and allowing me to share my data with you and my story with you. And he said, Pietro, he goes, I want you to know that you were the first one I sent out. So you're officially the first insulin treated diabetic pilot to be certified for an FAA first class medical. And of course, that made me feel great. Not that I was racing to be the first, but I just wanted this change, and I'll get to what I'm getting at in a second. But he knew how much that meant to me because of our conversations over the years. Sure. But then he shared with me, he said, if I didn't shed a tear when I sent out that medical, he goes, I'd be lying to you. And so it just told me a lot about who you guys
are dating.
It was a little bit of a romance there. I'm not gonna lie. I'm
going to get him on the podcast and see if he cares about you as much as you care about.
Hey, he changed my life. I didn't change his. Right, so
well, I don't know about that. It sounds like the process of taking somebody like you, and I'm thinking the countless other people like you who have type 1 diabetes or using insulin want to fly this kind of an aircraft and can't. I would think he'd feel some sort of a real emotional charge behind changing people's lives. I think it's undeniable, honestly.
Definitely. Yeah. And Scott, I told him from the beginning when I first met him in 2016, I said, look, that would be awesome if I become certified. But I said, I don't want this just for me. I want this to be a change in a protocol, a change in a regulation. I want it to be, instead of a blanket no for people that have diabetes, I would like to see more people like myself that are qualified, that are controlled to be certified. And I said, I can't imagine being a kid at 10 years old, having this dream, and then being crushed minutes later when you're told, not only are you living with a chronic illness, and it's hard enough, especially for these kids that can't go to birthday parties and eat cake and ice cream like everybody else. But, to be told that, hey, I'm sorry, you have diabetes and this is one of the things you can't do. And so that really, meant a lot to me for this to become a change in regulation. And so I shared with him how I want this to be something that, is an obtainable goal. And I think that kids, when they're 10 years old, these parents, could almost bribe these kids and tell them, and use it as an incentive to, hey, take care of your health. And this is definitely an obtainable goal. Look, these people did it. These people changed the rules for you guys. And so growing up, I think that's a crucial time in their life when they're, 10, 11 years old, to learn that your dream is not crushed. In fact, you can dream big, because this is definitely an obtainable goal. Look at these people have done it. Take care of yourself, take good care of your health. And when it comes time to go to flight school, if you have good blood sugars and if you maintain yourself in a good range and you use this CGM and to prove your data, that this is something that can be done. And so I was so thankful for that, and to know that it's not just me, it's other people as well, to me means an incredible amount.
Well, sure. It's that moment, right, when you realized I have type 1, I don't have type 2, you're begging the doctor, like, are you sure? Like, let's not do this. This is, you said that's probably the worst moment of your life, hearing that you couldn't fly these planes. And I mean, listen, sure. It's already an uncommon thing for someone to feel so strongly about something they want to do for the rest of their life. To take that thing from someone is specific, especially because there are, not a million people running around who want to fly airplanes around. It takes a special person. I know you don't know that about yourself. In some small way, being a pilot is a lot like being like a professional athlete, in that you just do this thing that feels normal, and you don't realize that most of the rest of us, can't throw a 103 mile an hour fastball. Like it's just like, if you put me in a plane and said, you can do this, Scott, I'd be like, no, I can't. And then I would get out of the plane and I'd yell at you because I'd want you to get
Yeah. I mean, it does take somebody, you got to want it. It's, I see this all the time in flight training, and there's people that, become pilots for various reasons, but most people that do this, they love what they do. And this is something, just like you said, professional athletes and whatnot. This is something that we dream of, as kids. Most of the time, it's something that you just have in you, and it's something that you just desperately want. And it just shows that, pilots are a certain type of people, they're very, I'm just going to put it out there. A lot of them are narcissistic, and they like the attention, and they like but overall they're people who, have a lot of pride and they take very seriously what they do. And so it's just one of those things that,
right.
As a kid, if you're that kid that has that and in you and you want to fly, you have diabetes, that shouldn't be something holding you back.
Take it from. Listen, it cost me $300 a year to have a company come to my house 3 times a year and clean the leaves out of my gutters because I'm not climbing up on a ladder. I do not want that as that's not how I'm going out. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not going to open my eyes back up, have St. Peter standing in front of me, which is oddly not something I even believe in, and then have to tell him that I was trying to clean my gutters out and now I'm dead. I can't. Right. I can't do that. I don't like leaving the ground. It's a bad thing for me.
You're not going to believe this if I tell you this. I have a fear of heights.
Get the hell out of here. Why would you say that to me?
I don't like being on balconies. I don't like being on ladders. I don't like being on the roof. I just get weird when I'm on an edge. However, in an airplane, I've never had this fear. I don't feel like I'm not secured. It's just a completely different feeling being in an airplane. I feel like I have control. I feel like, the wings are not going to fall off this thing. And so we're flying. But being on a balcony, being on the edge of a building, I get kind of uneasy. I don't like being, and it's funny because a lot of pilots will tell you that too. They don't like being up high where they don't feel like they have control.
Well, listen, you're younger, so you probably don't know about these old documents that you could watch. The colors were a little strange, but anyway, it was about this a rabbit, and he could talk. And sometimes he would get on a plane, and then a gremlin would come and like bang with a hammer and knock the wing off the plane. So you're saying they can't fall off, but I've seen documentaries about it, and I'm fairly certain it can happen. So
maybe in those days.
Well, I'm just telling you, 60s, and the rabbit cursed. It was amazing. You guys, cartoons suck now. I mean,
nothing
really.
that would come out now, would it?
No, I don't believe so. But anyway, they used to smoke cigars and everything. It was fantastic, honestly. Nevertheless,
different world.
Bugs Bunny aside, I think this is really one of the more interesting conversations that I've had. And it wasn't so much of a conversation. I kind of loved it because you have been so immersed in this over the years. You didn't need me here. Like I could have gotten on and said, "Hey, real quick, tell me about that whole thing with the flying. I'm going to go make a sandwich." And I think I would have come back and you'd still be telling your story, which I mean it's amazing because but it's a testament to how much you were involved in it to make it happen is what I'm saying.
It was quite a road, and I'm so thankful to have got to the end of the in this road, and it was hard. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was easy and blue skies and tailwinds the whole way, right. Because it was a challenging road. There were times where I was like, this is never going to happen, and there were so many people in my life. My family's close to me, and there's so many people that picked me up and made me believe and truly to never give up on this dream and that I could be. And I knew I was healthy, and it was only a matter of time. But there were times where, I would sit up at night and think to myself, like, why me with diabetes, number one, like a lot of people do, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I'm the only person in my family, and I have a big family. My family's Italian, and the majority of them still live in Italy. And out of all my cousins, out of all my aunts, uncles, nobody has diabetes except me. Mm. And I was just like, how is this possible with not that I would wish this upon anybody, don't get me wrong, but right. It's interesting how nobody in my family has diabetes, but yet the only person that can't have it, or at the time couldn't have it for his career, was me. And this is the career choice that I took, and I'm the one with diabetes. It's just so weird to me. It was just a hard pill to swallow.
Do you want me to tell you how I knew you were Italian?
How's that?
All right. on your pilot's license that you were really cool put up on your Instagram, which, by the way, if people want to see it, what's your Instagram handle?
Yeah, it's Marsala, like my last name. It's Marsala 90. Okay, is my Instagram handle.
Cool.
So
yeah, everybody should check it out. It's very cool. But it's because you're 5'8" on the license, and every Italian guy.
That's hilarious.
Every Italian guy I know grew like they were like 5'8" when they were 9 years old and then never got any taller. Is this
haven't
what
grown
happened to
since.
you?
Yeah, exactly. Tallest kid in 6th grade,
Yeah,
and then
100%.
never grew since.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't know a lot about, about lineage and things like that, but I've seen that enough times. I can make that generalization with a lot of comfort.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's hilarious. That's a good point. I'm about as tall as my dad. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I want to thank you. This is terrific. And I can't let you go before I find out, and not on the recording because this isn't anybody's business, but I want to know if you broke up with a girlfriend from Washington or if she broke up with you, because I have a theory that when you failed, she lost like faith in you, and she was like, no, that's it. This kid couldn't get it done, and I'm on my way.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happened. No, it's interesting. Just kind of short story on her. She's an airline pilot herself now. And we met in the industry. And so,
wait, hold on. Pietro, the planes are going by. Can you?
Oh, really?
There's no way you can hear them. Hold on.
They fighter jets?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. There's, I think it's, 2 squadrons.
What's the flyover for?
They're celebrating people who are working in hospitals during the coronavirus COVID-19 thing. And they're on this weird path up and down I can't believe my house just rumbled. And I was like, I can still hear them. That's
must
amazing.
Be flying pretty low. Are you far from New York?
I'm not far from New York, but I think they came out of Fort Dix, and I'm pretty close to there.
Okay.
So I think I'm catching them on the return to the base. Anyway, well, I'm sorry. You were about to share personal details about how your relationship broke up, and I don't want to stop you.
Yeah. So anyway, so she's an airline pilot herself, and kind of life just took us in different directions as she started traveling, and I was here in Phoenix, and so we kind of just grew apart from each other at that point. But no, I wish her nothing but the best. She's a good person, but yeah, it just wasn't for us.
You know what? It's amazing that you said something real and not stupid like I was getting at. And because that was the one question I have here on my notes that I've been making while you've been talking. Just because you talk quickly and I didn't want to, I didn't want to run you over. I'm not saying you shouldn't have. I'm saying I don't usually make notes. Usually I just run people over and just say something, but I made notes because I didn't want to stop your vibe you had going. And that was my one question about one day being an airline pilot, is that idea of like how transient you are all the time. Is that something you're prepared for? And how have you prepared for it? If so,
you mean like for me personally, or for like my relationship, or what?
I guess, yes, like all of it.
Okay.
Like, right. You're constantly going to be in a thing, moving back and forth, and you don't end up at home at the end of the day all the time.
Yeah. And so I know a lot of pilots now that have been in the industry 10 years, and, I can tell you that it is not easy. There's a reason why there's a lot of pilots out there that are divorced. And so I think it is hard on a lot of families to be gone. I mean, you're missing, I know you're close with your kids. I've heard you talk about your son's baseball and whatnot. You've been very active in his life with that.
Right.
And so you do miss these things. You miss birthdays. You miss, especially in the beginning, if you start your career in your 20s, your early 20s, and you're, an airline pilot in your early 20s, I think it becomes a little bit easier because seniority in this world of aviation, at least in the commercial aviation part of it, is everything. And so if you start in your early 20s, by the time you're in your 30s, you have pretty good seniority built at your company, typically. And so you're able to, get these days off. You bid your schedule a month in advance. And so if you have your son's baseball game that's coming up and you see his schedule, you can, request these days off. You can get these days off in advance if you're senior enough. But if you're the guy like myself who's just starting out now, you're going to be at the bottom of the seniority list. And unfortunately, you're going to miss things like birthdays. You're going to miss things like, baseball games and special events and weddings and whatnot. Not to say you don't get time off, but it's a lot harder when you're at the bottom of the seniority list. And so, yes, it is a challenge, not just for relationships, but just all the above. It does become really hard. But again, going back to pilots, and there's nothing else I'd rather do than stare outside and that be my office when I'm looking out, at 30,000 feet, 35,000 feet. That's what I dream of doing. And I know it sounds kind of selfish to some people, but at this point in my life, I'm just focused on my career. And then one day, if I meet the right person who wants kids, and at that time, if it's the right time to have kids and whatnot, then I'll cross that bridge when I do. But it's going to be a lot of sacrificing, and it's not for everybody. It's not a life. Anybody that travels in general for a living can tell you that it's not easy on any family.
Yeah, I have to say, being sincere, I'm jealous of the idea that you know how to fly a plane. I think it sounds incredibly peaceful. I wish I had the type of mind that was interested in that. But mostly, I guess what I've learned there at the end is that until you gain seniority, yours and Dr. Duvall's relationship is probably going to be the best one you have for a little while.
Exactly.
Poor guy.
Well, we'll keep in touch. I think he's got like 5 or 6 years left till he retires. So yeah, we'll stay buds for a little bit.
That'll be nice. You guys will have plenty of time once he doesn't have anything to do.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. I'll go visit him. We can hang out and talk about the good times when I didn't have a medical and how we got there.
All right, man. Listen, I genuinely appreciate you coming on and doing this. It was great. You were terrific, and I wish you nothing but success. I mean, hopefully, obviously, everything comes together for us all about being able to move around more freely, and you're able to get out there and find the job you've been looking for so long. I'm incredibly happy for you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Scott. It was nice to speak with you on the phone, not just hear your podcast and actually kind of meet officially. So thanks for making me laugh as well. It was a good conversation. I've done a lot of these interviews. I did one with CNN and I did one with the local Fox station here in Phoenix. And
mine was the best. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I'm getting at that. I was the most, I'm a little bit more experienced now with podcasts, even though I still speak quickly. And I've listened back on these podcasts that I've done. I'm like, God, I don't even let the guy talk. Hopefully I wasn't like that with you, and I let you speak a little bit because I get going, and like you said, I don't I don't even know that I'm still talking.
Well, that's how I go, and I don't know anything about how the FAA made it possible for people with type 1 diabetes to get this first class medical license, so I figured I'd be better off letting you talk. No, man, listen, you're passionate, it comes through, and it's much preferable. You can ask anybody who does an interview. It's much preferable that you have too much to say than I'm sitting here pulling thoughts out of you for an hour. So I thought it was terrific, but I do like that we're ending on I was better than CNN. Is that what you were getting ready to say? Did you want to say that out loud?
Yeah, I'm getting there. No, it was fun. It was very relaxed, the podcast. So no, I enjoyed it. I appreciate that. We'll keep in touch, and obviously I follow you on Instagram and you follow me, so you'll be able to see my career progression. Hopefully in the not too distant future, we could get back at it after this all passes.
I'm excited for it. One day there'll be the technology where you and I can record one of these while you're flying a plane. That would be amazing.
I don't know if the FAA would like that.
Well, you know the guy. We can work it out.
I know the guy, exactly. I know a guy, huh?
All right, man. Have a great day. Thanks so much.
Hey, you too.
Huge thanks to the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor and to the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump for sponsoring today's show. There are links to all of the sponsors at juiceboxpodcast.com or right there in the links of the show notes in your podcast app. But don't forget, a G6 is just a decision away. Just do it. Dexcom.com/juicebox. And at the very least, get yourself a free no obligation demo of the Omnipod. That's just fun to get stuff in the mail.